Thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Tom Miller sat in his wooden cabin, listening to the wind howl through the pine trees. The weather report had warned about this storm, but even after living here for 5 years, he'd never seen one quite this fierce. Rain pounded against his windows like tiny bullets, and the old cabin creaked under nature's assault. At 42, Tom had grown used to his solitary life on the outskirts of Pine Creek. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and that's exactly how he liked it. After 15 years of working in the busy city hospital as a nurse, he'd had enough of crowds. Now he worked from home as a medical consultant, living off his savings and the occasional online consultation. The power flickered once, twice, and then died completely. Tom sighed and reached for the emergency lantern he kept by his favorite armchair. The battery-powered device cast a warm glow across his living room, creating dancing shadows on the walls. His old black dog, Max, lifted his head from his bed near the fireplace, ears perking up at something. That's when Tom heard it, knocking at his door. Not just knocking, but pounding, desperate and urgent. Who would be out in this weather? He muttered, reaching for his flashlight. Max stood up, tail wagging slowly, but didn't bark, unusual for him when strangers approached. The pounding came again, more desperate this time. Tom hesitated. His cabin was far from the main road, and visitors at night were rare, especially during a storm. But what if someone had gotten lost or had car trouble? Coming, he called out, moving toward the door. The old boards creaked under his feet as lightning flashed again, illuminating his windows with brilliant white light. When he opened the door, the wind nearly knocked him backward. Rain sprayed his face, but that wasn't what made him freeze in place. There, illuminated by his flashlight beam, stood a woman, if you could call her that. She was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with skin the color of a summer sky and eyes that shimmered like liquid mercury. Her clothes looked like some kind of uniform, though they were torn and muddy. Tom's flashlight beam shook slightly as he took in her appearance. The alien woman, because what else could she be, had several cuts on her arms, and something dark that might have been blood was trickling from a gash on her forehead. Her hair, white as fresh snow, was plastered to her face by the rain. She spoke, her voice carrying a musical quality, despite her obvious distress. "Please, help." The words were accented but clear English. Tom Miller had seen many things during his years as an emergency room nurse. He treated gang violence victims, helped deliver babies in unusual places, and once even assisted with surgery during a power outage. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and he saw genuine fear in those strange silver eyes. In that moment, despite her alien appearance, all he could see was someone in need of help. His medical training kicked in, overriding his shock and fear. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "You're injured." The alien woman stumbled slightly as she entered, and Tom caught her arm to steady her. Her skin felt smooth and cool to the touch, like polished marble. Max approached her, sniffing curiously, but showing no signs of aggression. "Thank you," she said, water dripping from her clothes onto his wooden floor. She was shivering, another surprisingly human gesture. Tom closed the door against the storm and took a deep breath. His quiet life had just become a lot more complicated. But as he looked at his unexpected visitor, who was now petting Max with a surprised but delighted expression, he knew he couldn't have done anything else. Someone needed help, human or not, and that's all that mattered. "Let's get those injuries looked at," he said, reaching for his first aid kit, "and then you can tell me what brought you to my door in the middle of this storm." Lightning flashed again outside, but for the first time that night, Tom wasn't paying attention to the weather anymore. Tom cleaned the last cut on Ada's arm, still trying to process the situation. The alien woman sat quietly on his couch, watching his movements with those mesmerizing silver eyes. Her blue skin seemed to have a slight glow in the lantern light, and tiny markings that looked like constellations appeared and disappeared as she moved. "Your medical technique is unexpected," she said, breaking the silence. "Our data suggested humans were far more primitive." Tom couldn't help but smile as he applied the final bandage. "We might surprise you. Now, want to tell me what happened?" Ada straightened her back, a gesture that reminded Tom of military personnel he'd treated. "I am a scout from the Stellar Federation. My ship—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It malfunctioned during atmospheric entry. Your storm's electrical activity damaged my navigation systems." Max had settled his head on Ada's lap, completely at ease with their unusual guest. Tom noticed how she absent-mindedly stroked the dog's ears, another surprisingly human gesture. "A spaceship crash? Shouldn't there be some kind of wreckage?" "News reports," Tom asked, packing away his first aid supplies. "Our technology is more advanced than you might expect. The ship is designed to minimize impact and visibility. It's currently hidden in the forest about 2 miles from here." She winced as she shifted position, though the landing was far from perfect. Thunder boomed outside, making them both jump. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the wind continued to howl through the trees. "Your world is very intense," Ada commented, looking toward the window. "The atmospheric disturbances here are much stronger than what we experience at home." Tom moved to the kitchen, putting water on his old gas stove for tea. "Where exactly is home?" "A planet you would call HD 40,307 grams, she replied. "Though we name it differently. It's about 40 light-years from Earth." The kettle whistled, and Tom noticed Ada flinch at the sound. He quickly removed it from the heat. "Tea," he offered, then realized she might not even know what tea was. To his surprise, she nodded. "We observed that humans often offer beverages during social interactions. I would like to try this. Tea." As Tom prepared the drinks, he noticed Ada examining everything in his cabin with intense curiosity. She seemed particularly fascinated by his bookshelf. "You store information in physical form?" she asked, gesturing at the books. "Some of us prefer it," Tom replied, handing her a mug. "Careful, it's hot." Ada took a careful sip and her eyes widened. This sensation, heat and flavor combined. Fascinating. She took another sip, then suddenly tensed, her head turning sharply toward the window. "What's wrong?" Tom asked, noticing her change in demeanor. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Tom Miller. The ship malfunction wasn't an accident. I was forced to crash land here." Tom set his mug down slowly. "Forced? By whom?" "My own people," Ada said quietly. "I discovered something they don't want anyone to know. About Earth. About humans." She looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the lantern light. "They're coming for me, Tom. And when they find me, they'll find you too. I shouldn't have come here. I've put you in danger." Before Tom could respond, a bright light flashed outside, different from lightning. It was focused, searching, and definitely not natural. Max growled low in his throat, his fur standing on end. Ada stood up quickly, ignoring the pain from her injuries. "They're here already. I need to leave." Tom found himself facing a choice. He could let her go, return to his quiet life, and pretend this never happened. Or, "No," he said firmly, standing up. "You're injured. It's storming, and whatever's going on, running out there right now is suicide. We'll figure this out together." Ada stared at him, genuine surprise crossing her alien features. "You would help me, even knowing the danger?" Another searchlight swept past the window. "Well," Tom said, already moving to turn off the lantern, "looks like we're about to have some very interesting company." Tom quickly led Ada to his basement, grateful that his old cabin had one. Max followed them silently, his usual playfulness replaced by alert watchfulness. The basement wasn't much, just a concrete room filled with supplies and old furniture, but it would have to do. Your species continues to confound me, Ada whispered as Tom closed the heavy wooden door. By all logical measures, you should have turned me away or reported my presence. Logic isn't everything, Tom replied, setting up his battery-powered lantern on a low setting. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut. Trust your digestive system. Ada's confusion was evident on her face. Despite the tense situation, Tom couldn't help but chuckle. It's just a saying. It means following your instincts. Above them, the storm continued to rage, masking any sounds their pursuers might be making. Tom used the time to check Ada's injuries again. The cut on her forehead had almost completely healed, far faster than any human wound would. Your medical care was unnecessary, Ada admitted, watching him work. Our bodies heal quickly. But she paused, touching the bandage he'd applied earlier. The gesture itself was meaningful. A loud crash from upstairs made them both freeze. Max's ears perked up, but the old dog remained silent, pressing closer to Ada's leg. "They're inside," she breathed, her voice barely audible. Tom held up a hand for silence, straining to hear movement above. Heavy footsteps creaked across his living room floor. He counted at least 3 distinct sets. "The human dwelling shows recent occupation," a deep voice said, the words slightly distorted as if coming through some kind of translator. "The fugitive passed through here." Ada's hand found Tom's in the dim light, squeezing it. Her skin felt cooler than before, and he realized she was afraid. Not just for herself, but for him. "These humans," another voice said, disgust evident in its tone. "Living in wooden boxes, burning fossil fuels for heat. How did they ever manage to worry High Command?" "You underestimate them," a third voice replied. "That's exactly why High Command is concerned. They're unpredictable, resourceful. They achieve things they shouldn't be capable of." Tom felt a surge of pride at those words, even as he held his breath. The footsteps moved toward the kitchen, then the bedroom. "No signs of current life forms," the first voice announced. "Thermal scanners show residual heat only. They must have flowed into the storm." Ada's grip on Tom's hand loosened slightly. He looked at her in the dim light, seeing relief wash over her features. "The basement remains unchecked," the third voice said. The relief vanished instantly. Ada's eyes widened in panic, but Tom squeezed her hand reassuringly. He reached into his pocket with his free hand, pulling out his phone. "Negative," the second voice responded. "Scans show solid concrete foundation. No heat signatures. No access points." Tom smiled. The thick concrete walls of his old basement, combined with the metal shelving he used for his emergency supplies, must have been blocking their scanners. Sometimes old, primitive construction had its advantages. They waited in tense silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, the heavy footsteps moved toward the front door. "They must have continued north," the first voice said. "Alert the search teams. We move out immediately." The front door closed, and silence fell again, broken only by the continuing storm outside. Tom and Ada waited several more minutes before either dared to speak. "How did you know they wouldn't find us?" Ada whispered. "I didn't," Tom admitted. "But I've lived in this old place long enough to know its quirks. The basement's always blocked cell phone signals. Figured it might block other things too." Ada stared at him with those silver eyes, a new understanding dawning in them. "This is what they fear," she said softly. "Not your technology or your weapons. It's this ability to think sideways, to use simple things in clever ways. We call it thinking outside the box," Tom said with a small smile. "Another saying." "Yeah. Though right now we're literally hiding inside one." For the first time since she'd arrived, Ada laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. And in that moment, despite their differences, despite the danger, they found a connection that transcended their separate worlds. Once they were certain the searchers had gone, Tom and Ada returned upstairs. The storm had weakened to a steady rain, and the first light of dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon. "I need to tell you everything," Ada said, sitting at Tom's kitchen table. She looked tired, if aliens could look tired. "You've risked your life for me. You deserve to know why." Tom put fresh water on for tea, his own exhaustion pushed aside by curiosity. "I'm listening. My people, the ones searching for me. They're part of our military intelligence division. 3 months ago, I discovered their plans for Earth." Ada's fingers traced patterns on the wooden table. "They believe humans are too dangerous to be left alone." "Dangerous?" Tom frowned. "We haven't even achieved interstellar travel yet." "That's exactly what makes you dangerous," Ada explained. "Your species develops in unexpected ways. While we advanced in a straight line, humans jump around. You created nuclear weapons before you fully understood radiation. You reached your moon using computers less powerful than." She gestured at Tom's phone on the table. The kettle whistled, and Tom poured their tea. "So what's their plan?" "They want to trigger a conflict. Make it look like another human war." Ada wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "They've studied your history. They know how easily humans turn against each other." Tom sat down heavily. "A fake war to make us destroy ourselves." Ada nodded. "But it gets worse. I found evidence that they've already begun. Small things, manipulating communications, causing accidents in sensitive areas, stirring up old conflicts." Outside, a bird started singing, the dawn chorus beginning despite the rain. The normalcy of it felt strange against their conversation. "The data core from my ship contains proof," Ada continued. "Records of their plans, orders signed by high-ranking officials, even test results from their early interference attempts." "Where is the ship now?" "Hidden in a ravine, about 2 miles northeast. The crash damaged its cloaking system. That's why they found me so quickly." She looked up at Tom. "The core is still there. If I can retrieve it, get it to the right people, both on Earth and your world." Tom asked. Ada's expression showed surprise. "Yes. How did you?" "Just thinking logically," Tom said with a slight smile. "You'll need to prove it to both sides to prevent the war, right?" Max suddenly raised his head from his bed, ears forward. A moment later, Tom heard it too. A low humming sound, barely perceptible but growing stronger. "They're search ships," Ada whispered. "They're beginning a grid-pattern search of the area." Tom moved to his window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. In the gray dawn light, he could see dark shapes moving through the clouds, like silent, predatory birds. "We need to move," he said, already gathering supplies into his old hiking backpack. "They'll come back here eventually." "You're coming with me?" Ada asked, standing. "Tom, the risk is already taken," he interrupted, checking his first aid kit. "I'm involved now, and besides, you don't know these woods like I do." The humming grew louder, then faded as one of the ships passed overhead. "There are caves in these mountains," Tom continued, adding bottled water to his pack. "Places their scanners won't penetrate. We can use them to reach your ship." Ada watched him prepare with that same look of fascination she'd shown earlier. "You're not afraid?" Tom paused in his packing. "Terrified," he admitted. "But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right despite being scared." The alien woman stood straighter, a determined set to her shoulders. "Then we should hurry. We have perhaps 2 hours before they complete their first search pattern." Tom nodded, zipping up his pack. "Max, come," he called to his dog, who immediately trotted over. "We'll take the old logging trails. They're overgrown now, but they'll give us cover." As they prepared to leave, Tom took one last look at his cabin. He had a feeling things would never be quite the same after today. But as he watched Ada check the sky through his window, he knew he was making the right choice. Sometimes the biggest adventures started with a simple knock on the door. The old logging trail was barely visible now, overgrown with 20 years of new growth. Tom led the way, with Max ranging ahead and Ada following close behind. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the trees still dripped steadily, soaking everything. "Down," Tom whispered sharply, dropping to the ground. Ada followed instantly, her military training evident in her quick response. Above them, one of the search ships passed slowly, its scanning beams cutting through the morning mist. They lay still until the humming faded. "How much further?" Ada whispered. "Another mile," Tom replied, carefully standing. "There's a cave system ahead. We can use it to circle around to your ship." They moved forward again, their feet silent on the wet earth. Tom had spent years exploring these woods, and now every bit of that knowledge was proving vital. He led them through dense undergrowth, across shallow streams, and under low-hanging branches that would confuse aerial searches. Max suddenly stopped, his hackles rising. Before Tom could react, they heard voices ahead. The search party was on foot now. "This way," Tom breathed, guiding Ada off the trail. They crawled under a fallen log, into a space he knew well. Years ago, he'd found this natural hollow while tracking deer. Now it saved their lives. Through gaps in the bark, they watched as three figures in sleek environmental suits passed by. Their scanners swept the area, but the thick, rotting wood and dense vegetation scattered the readings. "These forests are impossible," one searcher complained. "Too much biological interference." "The fugitive must be using them for cover," another responded. "Keep searching." Once they passed, Tom led Ada out the other side of the hollow. They were closer to the caves now, but also closer to danger. The search parties were closing in. "Tom," Ada whispered as they crouched behind a large boulder, "even if we reach the ship, the data core is damaged. I need equipment to repair it." "What kind of equipment?" "Something to conduct and focus energy, to rebuild the quantum pathways." Tom thought for a moment. Would copper wire work? And maybe some quartz crystals. Ada's silver eyes widened. "Yes, actually." "But where?" "There's an old copper mine in these caves, abandoned in the 50s, and these mountains are full of quartz deposits." He grinned. "Sometimes primitive can be useful." Another search ship passed overhead, lower this time. They pressed against the boulder until it passed. "The cave entrance is just ahead," Tom whispered, "but they'll be watching it." Max whined softly, pawing at the ground near their feet. Tom looked down and smiled. "Good boy," he said softly, brushing away some leaves to reveal a narrow crack in the rock. "What is it?" Ada asked. "Back way in. Found it years ago, when Max chased a rabbit down here." Tom pulled a flashlight from his pack. "It's tight, but it connects to the main cave system." Ada looked dubious. "Your technology can't detect the full extent of these caves." "Nope. Too much mineral interference. That's why the mining company missed half the good deposits." Tom started easing himself into the crack. Sometimes not having advanced technology means you have to look harder. Find things the old-fashioned way. The crack was narrow but passable. They squeezed through one at a time, with Max following last. Their flashlight beams revealed the glitter of quartz in the walls. "Perfect," Ada breathed, touching a crystal formation. "This will work." From outside, they heard the muffled sound of voices and scanning equipment. The search party had reached the main cave entrance. "They'll take hours to search these caves properly," Tom whispered. "And they'll never find all the passages. Locals have been exploring here for generations, and we're still finding new ones." Ada studied him in the dim light. "Your people, you adapt to your limitations instead of trying to overcome them directly. It's efficient in its own way." Tom shrugged. "We work with what we have. Now let's find that copper wire. Your ship isn't going to fix itself." They moved deeper into the cave system, while above them, their pursuers searched in vain, their advanced technology defeated by simple geology and human knowledge passed down through generations of hikers and miners. Deep in the cave system, Tom and Ada worked quickly. The old copper wiring from the abandoned mine, combined with carefully selected quartz crystals, was slowly bringing the damaged data core back to life. Max kept watch at the tunnel entrance, his ears constantly alert for any sound. "It's working," Ada whispered, her fingers moving with precision over the alien technology. "The quantum pathways are reforming." A distant echo of voices made them both freeze. The search parties were getting closer, methodically checking every branch of the cave system. "How much longer?" Tom asked, keeping his voice low. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Ada's silver eyes reflected the dim light of their flashlight. "But they'll find us before then." Tom thought quickly. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Ada looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "They're looking for us, right? So let's give them something to look at." He reached into his pack and pulled out his emergency flares. "These caves have multiple levels. We can use that." Understanding dawned in Ada's eyes. A distraction. Better. Tom grinned. An echo chamber. They worked rapidly, placing flares at strategic points through the cave system. Tom's years of exploring these caves were proving invaluable. He knew every twist, every turn, every acoustic trick the limestone caverns could provide. The voices were closer now. Search beams swept through the adjacent tunnels, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "Ready?" Tom whispered. Ada nodded, holding the partially repaired data core. Max pressed against her leg, unusually quiet. Tom lit the first flare. Its bright red light reflected off the cave walls, bouncing through the crystal formations, creating multiple points of light. He quickly lit 2 more at different angles. The effect was immediate. The search beams swung toward the light show, and urgent voices echoed through the caves. "Movement detected. Multiple signatures. Impossible. The readings are everywhere." The quartz crystals magnified and split the flare light, creating dozens of false readings on their scanners. The cave system itself amplified their confusion, bouncing sound and light in unpredictable patterns. "Time to move," Tom whispered, leading them through a narrow passage he'd discovered years ago. It bypassed the main tunnel system entirely, emerging near the ravine where Ada's ship lay hidden. Behind them, chaos erupted in the caves. The search parties, their sophisticated equipment overwhelmed by the simple combination of light, crystal, and stone, were chasing shadows. They emerged from the cave into the gray dawn light. The rain had stopped, but a heavy mist clung to the ground, providing natural cover. There, Ada pointed to a shimmer in the air, her partially cloaked ship. But they weren't alone. 3 figures in environmental suits stood guard at the ship's entrance. "Now what?" Ada whispered. Tom picked up a rock and smiled. More primitive technology. He threw the rock far to their left. It crashed through some branches, creating a sharp cracking sound. The guards immediately turned toward the noise, raising their weapons. "Oldest trick in the book," Tom murmured, leading them right while the guards were distracted. Sometimes the simple solutions work best. They were almost at the ship when one of the guards turned. "Stop," the translated voice commanded. Tom didn't stop. Instead, he pulled out his last flare and struck it, throwing it directly at the guard's faceplate. The bright magnesium flare, designed to be seen for miles, overwhelmed the guard's enhanced visual sensors. Ada yanked him aboard the ship as weapons fire sizzled past them. Max bounded in last, barking for the first time since their adventure began. The core. Ada quickly connected the repaired device to her ship's systems. "It's working. Transmitting data now." Outside, more guards were approaching. Their weapons began to pound against the ship's hull. "How long?" Tom asked, holding onto a wall as the ship shuddered. 30 seconds. Ada's fingers flew over the controls. "They can't stop the transmission now." The ship's hull began to glow from the weapons fire, but Ada was smiling. "What?" Tom asked. "They're too late," she said triumphantly. "The truth is already out. Both Earth and my world now know everything." The pounding suddenly stopped. Through the ship's viewport, they watched as the guards received some kind of message, their postures showing clear defeat. 3 months later, Tom sat on his cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Max dozed at his feet, only occasionally lifting his head when a deer wandered too close to their garden. The aftermath of Ada's revelation had changed the world, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of panic or fear, humanity had responded to the news of alien life with remarkable adaptability. Perhaps it helped that their first contact had come with proof of both the threat and its prevention. Still watching these sunsets, Ada's voice came from behind him. She stepped out onto the porch, now wearing Earth clothes, jeans, and a simple blue shirt that almost matched her skin tone. "Best show in the galaxy," Tom replied, gesturing to the other chair. "How was the UN meeting?" Ada sat down, her silver eyes reflecting the sunset. "Productive. Your world leaders are surprisingly practical once they stop posturing. The exchange program is officially approved." Tom smiled. After the truth about the Military Intelligence Division's plans had been exposed, Ada's people had undergone significant political changes. The moderates who'd always advocated for peaceful contact with Earth had gained power, and now both civilizations were carefully building diplomatic relationships. "And they agreed to let you stay as the first ambassador?" Tom asked, though he already knew the answer. "They did." Ada reached down to scratch Max's ears. The old dog had completely adopted her as part of his family. "Though I think your primitive living conditions shocked them." They shared a laugh at that. The word primitive had become something of a joke between them. "You know," Tom said, watching the last rays of sunlight fade, "I never asked you. Why did you choose my door that night?" "During the storm." Ada was quiet for a moment. "I'd been observing Earth for weeks before I discovered the invasion plans. Out of all the humans I watched, you seemed different. You lived alone, but helped anyone who needed it. You had skills and knowledge, but didn't boast about them. You were human, in the best way." "Lucky guess on your part," Tom said modestly. "Not luck. Observation and instinct." Ada smiled. "Two things our people share, even if we express them differently." From inside the cabin, they heard the radio crackle with news about the latest diplomatic developments. The world was changing fast, but somehow, here in this quiet corner of Montana, everything felt remarkably normal. "The exchange students arrive next week," Ada mentioned. 20 of our young ones coming to learn Earth ways, 20 humans going to study with us. Still think we're too dangerous to be left alone?" Tom teased. "Oh, you're definitely dangerous," Ada replied seriously, "but not in the way my people thought. Your danger comes from your unpredictability, your creativity, your ability to make the impossible work with whatever you have at hand. But those are exactly the qualities that make you valuable allies." The first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, Ada's homeworld was going about its business, forever changed by one scout's decision to trust a human during a storm. "You know what the best part is," Tom said thoughtfully. "Both our peoples are learning. Your technology combined with our adaptability, your knowledge with our creativity. We're both stronger together than apart." "Indeed." Ada stood up, stretching in the growing darkness. "Speaking of learning, you promised to teach me this thing called cooking tonight." Tom laughed and got up. "Fair warning, I'm a terrible cook." "Perfect," Ada said, following him inside. Another chance to observe human ingenuity in dealing with failure. As they entered the warm light of the cabin, Tom thought about how much had changed since that stormy night. A knock on his door had led not just to saving Earth from a hidden threat, but to something much more important, proving that different civilizations could learn from each other, grow together, and find strength in their differences. Max followed them inside, his tail wagging as he anticipated dinner. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance across the Montana sky, now watched by two very different sets of eyes that had learned to see the universe in new ways. Sometimes the biggest changes in the universe started with the smallest acts of kindness, And sometimes, being primitive wasn't such a bad thing after all.